Hey everybody, what's up? Wait, pause. I don't know. Is this okay? Actually, keep it going. It's okay.
For our zero viewers
Uh,
anyway, so it's okay.
right. I guess this is our first video in 2021.
Oh yeah.
Uh, we've been wanting to do it consistently, but clearly we haven't been. Not for any genuine reason, if you ask me. I don't know if
I
Chintan has
mean,
another view on it, but it's
I think
largely
yeah.
because we've just been lazily, lazy bums. But either way, we intend to do it more regularly and more consistently this year. And interesting things, I think, topics we'll cover, relatively unique.
No, to add to the
Uh,
lazy bum comment, we're gonna be reacting
yeah.
again. So
What do you mean?
reaction videos are pretty, I think.
Right. Oh, right. Exactly. Exactly. But yeah, that's yeah. In our defense, so not a very good one. We'll be picking at least unique videos to react to, which usually people don't.
Yeah,
Political videos, maybe people do.
I
Yeah.
do think the topic is very unique and
Yeah,
nice. I
yeah,
think so.
relatively. In terms of reaction videos, but in terms of general political discussion, I guess capitalism is a pretty popular topic. But for today's video, for those of you who haven't realized already or do not know about him, this is David Graeber. I think he recently died. Maybe you can look that up. I don't know if he died this year. No, probably in December. I'm not sure. But I first heard of David Graeber because of the two different places. One was when I was getting into reading a few years ago, reading books, and I was getting into money and Bitcoin. I started understanding the concept of money. He wrote a famous book called Debt, which a friend had recommended me to read. I still haven't, but I intend to do so at some points. And the second time I heard it again, Bitcoin related on Twitter, he got into an argument with a famous Bitcoin personality, someone who was part of the a key contributor to the white paper of Bitcoin, Nick Szabo. So he's also somewhat economist, anthropologist, etc., etc. That field of social science. So they got into some kind of discussion, which David Graeber didn't engage in entirely. I think he stopped at some point, but yeah, that's how I heard of him. And then I started watching his videos, learned about how he's an anarchist, learned a lot more about anarchism as a result. And yeah,
No,
just
like
thought this
the
would be an interesting video.
yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Like he seems to be very like an interesting person.
Oh, he
Like
is. So I'll give you another thing. He also, yeah. So another Twitter spat he got. He got into a fight with Nassim Nicholas Taleb on Twitter. Taleb gets in a fight with a lot of intellectuals, but despite that, after he died, Nassim Taleb called him one of the most original thinkers. So he had only high praise, real high praise coming from Nassim Taleb. So yeah,
like
in
the
spite of having disagreements with a lot of his intellectual ideas, he genuinely believed he was the original guy, and he thought these ideas were original. So, yeah.
right. No, like that's what like for all the people like even I learned the meaning of this word recently and it was pretty interesting.
Sure.
Anthropologist or
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
anthropology
yeah. Yeah,
is
that's
the
study.
study of aspects of humans within past and present societies, which is awesome.
Yep, yep, yep.
And what
You
were
still you should read *Sapiens*. Yeah, you'll get it. It's a good book. It's all about anthropology.
dude, what's an essayist? Now that makes me
That is something that Nassim Taleb probably asked someone to write about him. He's very bright, so he wanted to be somehow unique, I guess.
there
But
is no
it's not commonly.
Wikipedia article for essayist.
I guess an essayist is a guy who writes essays,
Essays,
but
huh?
the Google what I don't know. Google what essays mean. That sounds like something
Essays.
Nassim Taleb would have asked someone to do.
A person who writes essays, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so that's his humor, his form of humor. I would suspect he has something to do with it, but yeah, because he didn't want to be classified probably as an economist. He probably didn't want to be classified as an anthropologist and or a statistician or a mathematician, perhaps. But I don't know. Never know.
Right, right.
Or it could be something as simple as like you write authors. He's also an author. He's also a director. So something like that. He's an essayist. He writes essays for magazines or papers or something like that. Perhaps
Right,
that.
right, right, right.
But I don't know. Yeah, but it does sound funny.
Okay, so like any context behind the video or You want to?
Not particularly, just that I was looking for criticisms for capitalism, and I like I'm a free market guy. I like less state intervention. So being an anarchist, we probably have some ideas in common. So just was looking for criticisms in capitalism, basically.
Right, all right, all right. We'll go ahead.
Yeah,
I'll
yeah,
play it.
yeah, sure, sure, please. What's that?
You wanna mute yourself from in Discord
Sure,
once? I
sure,
can
sure.
hear
When you're playing,
noise. Yeah, yeah. And just pause whenever you want, okay? Just pause and talk, that's what.
restart the video, yeah. Girl in the back seems to be very happy.
What was that? You muted yourself.
The girl in the back seems to be very happy. I'm not
Yeah,
sure
yeah,
about
she's
what, but
amused.
she's smiling.
Yeah.
She's impressed. Nice.
essentially saying we need greater government control on energy production to contain global warming. And these are the guys who are the heads of energy companies. Basically saying stop us before we kill again. We don't want we don't want to destroy the world, but we are compelled by the structure of our position. We're answerable only to our stockholders. We have to make the maximum amount of profit possible for them, regardless of our personal feelings. We don't like the
Yo,
results. Create laws to stop us.
You can pause the
this
video
is
if anyways.
no, I can't. It creates an issue because I'll be watching it on the other screen then. Either way,
Hmm.
what I was saying is this criticism. I don't know. Okay, now sure he says. I see the irony, right? They're in control of power. They seem to be the cause of the environmental problems, but they're still seeking help. But it does indicate or demonstrate to some extent how much powers these large CEOs actually have, right? It
But
goes to show that they can't control it much.
I mean,
The
like,
issue.
oh, okay, that's what you're saying. Got it. Right.
So because the market wants it, the people want it, and all, it's not entirely up to them, you know. So their control and their power is limited,
True.
which is something people should pay attention to. You know, when they say these 150 businessmen controlling the world, they are limited to a large extent by the consensus of the people, by what the people want, or
So are you
So
saying that, like, in that case, like, government control is a little bit of at least government control over companies? I mean, socialism, I guess, is there, it needs to exist. That's what you're saying.
um, no, actually, to a large extent, I'm blaming the people because I'm just saying they're reflecting what the people want to a large extent. Because the general population is still using petrol and fuel and planes and all those things, in spite of knowing its its consequences.
But then
So
people also, I mean, like, even people, you can't really, they also go, just take what is given to them
given
also,
to
right?
right. So everyone has to be blamed. If you're blaming the head, the CEO for what the people
Right.
want, and you're not blaming the people for their not taking responsibility. I mean, everyone's responsible here.
Yeah.
Maybe to a large extent. They're also trying to make an attempt to use the government. But in this case, I don't know. I'm not making a comment yet on what's good and bad because I still don't understand it. I just use my intuitions to determine these things. There's a lot of statistics and data you'll have to study to make a properly educated guess or conclusion. But all I'm trying to say is the reason the CEOs are going to the governments is because government can use force in the people. They can go against the will of the people. That's why. That's how I'm looking at it. So they need someone who has that authority over the people. It's kind of telling, if you think about it. I don't
Like
know.
you're
In
saying,
terms of in terms of the view that these large scale billionaires are the ones controlling the world,
right.
but even they have to ask the governments to control it. It's kind of telling that how much where the power really lies to a large extent. But I'm not saying it's that clear cut. I'm sure these billionaires have significant power. But in this one case, in the example he's giving, I feel like
Yeah, yeah.
it's a perspective that came in my head. Although I'm sure he has a
No, but
larger
that's the
point to
thing,
make.
right?
I
He's
don't know.
saying he's saying that, like, the CEOs or whoever the heads are
Yeah,
themselves asking the government to take control and put some regulations on us. But that doesn't really
sure.
happen that often, right? I mean, like, the heads and all don't really, I don't know, they probably want to run their own, house or whatever.
I don't know. I don't know if that's the case because if you see any of the top, there's this investor called Chamath, that Sri Lankan Chamath. I
Yeah,
forgot his
yeah,
second
yeah,
name.
yeah.
He's a
Okay.
famous, yeah, yeah, exactly. So he was talking. I saw a video of his where he was talking. Actually, it's a video we could again react to, but it's all right. He was talking about how 150 people control the world, and he wants to get into that league to investment. They don't give a shit what the rest of the world thinks. That's how much power and control they have. Probably most of them billionaires. So he's trying to get into that league to really influence the world, stuff like that. So um, why did I bring it up? So, yeah, so these people, 150 people, actually think about all issues in the world. They think about everything. The thing is, environmental problems affect them also. That's why they have to consider. If the world is in chaos, their business, everything's in chaos. Their life is in chaos. So So I do think they think about environmental problems. What David was trying to do is bring out the irony in that, where he's saying that they have the power and the ability to change all these power problems, all these fossil fuel environmental pollution problems, but they still have to but they themselves go and ask the government to help them out. So he was just pointing out that irony for what we're about to see. I'm sure he'll explain it more. We cut it short, but
Yeah, yeah.
I just didn't want to lose this thought that where people should realize the limitations of the
Sure,
powers of these
sure, sure.
150
Yeah,
billionaires.
yeah.
from doing
We can
this.
rewind a
And I
little,
think that
maybe.
brings home,
No, no.
very clearly what some of the structural contradictions are. Currently, the corporate structure is one that's in many ways created to stop people from acting ethically, even if they want to. And while it is true that in certain small startups and certain sectors, it is possible to act differently. The overall structure of the capitalist corporation is designed to prevent this from happening. I think that it's interesting that in your discourse, there's two things you didn't mention at all. One is the role of government, and the other is labor and the organization of labor, which I think are the two things which are absolutely imperatively important to understand. Again, depending on your definition of capitalism, and I always thought one of the most interesting definitions, I don't agree with it entirely, is that of Fernand Braudel, who points out that we tend to identify capitalism and the marketplace, but in many ways they're opposite principles. Markets are based on the idea of people with commodities of some kind selling them in order to be able to get other commodities that they need. Capitalism, he argues, is more the MCM. People with money acquiring commodities to sell them for more money, or sometimes just money to get more money. And he points out that in order to do that, you essentially have to create monopolies of some kind and working through government. Historically, where you have capitalism emerging from markets, and there's plenty of places in history where you can find very elaborate market systems, much of the history of China, and nothing like capitalism, because the people with large resources could not ally with the government in such a way to create institutional monopolies, which allowed them to systematically turn control of money into more money. Despite this, these were societies where there was great social creativity unleashed. They were often the most technologically creative societies in history up to that time. So there is no, so capitalism itself does not necessarily flow from the existence of markets. But second of all, I think we have to think about labor. Is it possible to have a capitalist system which is, say, rewarding entrepreneurial risk, but anybody getting a job is taking a risk as well, and the rewards are not equally distributed to the people who are taking that risk. So the very logic of capitalism has two standards for the reward of risk, one for people who are in charge of things and the other for people who are essentially at someone else's orders. Now, I think anybody who, again, believes in human freedom would not like to see a society in which most people spend most of the day being ordered around by somebody else. The question is it possible to have such a society organized on capitalist basis? Again, it strikes me that any system in which you had something like, say, workers' cooperatives, democratically organized internal organizations competing in the market, even if they were competing on a marketplace, would not be something that we would end up calling capitalism, and would not be possible under capitalism as currently conceived. I think that we could be talking about names, but it strikes me that insofar as it would be possible to have a social organization where most people are not actually simply subordinates following orders in a command structure, and in which you do not have institutional government guarantees of various types of monopoly and rent rights. It would be hard for me to think of that as capitalism or see what the point of calling it would be. The third element I think we have to talk about is growth. Capitalism from its origins has been based on the assumption that you need a certain amount of growth of production of goods and services in order for the entire system to remain stable. At the moment, we are engaged, at the cusp of an ecological crisis where what had been considered normal rates of growth are clearly unsustainable. It seems to me very difficult to understand how a profit-based system, such as exists today between competing corporations, would be able to maintain itself under a situation of sustainable levels of growth, which basically means none, and a distribution of resources in a more equitable fashion, since it would necessarily mean the most vicious level of cutthroat competition between existing firms if they're actually, the only way historically that capitalist firms have been able to offer any sort of reasonable deal to large members of the working class has been under periods of very high levels of growth that were in the mid-century that allowed Keynesian politics. Now, in a situation of zero growth, it's really hard to imagine how it wouldn't be either come down to some kind of vicious competition between labor and capitalism, or even more vicious competition between the capitalists themselves, or both at the same time. So these are some issues that I want to throw out. The final one, I guess, how many minutes do I have? 2 minutes, okay, is technology. Now, while it is true that historically capitalism has coincided with incredible amounts of technological creativity, most of that technological creativity has actually been funded by governments and not come out of private sector at all. And that's actually increasingly true. Or from the third sector, which isn't organized capital. Actually, a lot of primary research is now done neither by government nor by capitalist firms, but by NGOs and other cooperatives. But the corporatization and capitalization of research has actually led to a massive decline of technological innovation and growth. It seems to be, as a system, we're seeing capitalism has really come to about its limits in terms of its very ability to provide the thing which had been its major advantage, which was rapid and spectacular technological innovation leading to greater possibilities and prosperity, which allows wealth to be redistributed to a degree where that normal tendency for wealth to accumulate, on which so many people, most recently Piketty, has observed, could be to some degree undercut. So it seems to me we've got at a period where capitalism has really gone, it had a good historical run. But on every major measure we can find, it's running out of steam. It's no longer able to provide greater equality. It's creating greater inequality. It's no longer able to create technological innovation on anything like the scale it had before. If anything, it seems to be a break against such innovation. It no longer seems to be able to provide relative levels of peace and security for people. And at exactly the moment where it seems to be failing on all fronts, it seems surprising to me that there is this sudden movement within people who 30 years ago would have been against it to say, well, maybe we can save it from itself.
I mean, I still don't understand what like he's trying to support it, or you're muted. You're muted. You're muted.
Yeah, no, lot to cover. A lot of technical
Hey,
details he gave.
I
Yeah,
got full
but
confused, seriously.
I'm sure. I'm sure. He's an anarchist. He's against socialism as well as capitalism because he thinks both requires state control to a large extent.
Right.
So, and he I don't know if you got that, but he did say that free markets aren't the same as capitalism. And if you remember, I keep saying I'm a fan of markets. Well, my view of capitalism comes from Milton Friedman, as you know, someone we'll talk about perhaps in the future. But Milton Friedman also described private enterprise and free markets as part of the definition of capitalism, which is something where these contention comes. These arguments come because he probably defines it differently compared to Milton Friedman. He clearly said that free markets and capitalism aren't the same thing, are not the same thing. Um, I'll just pick up a few things he said because he said a lot of things. One thing he said to distinguish the two is this you might find interesting, and the audience might as well. I forgot who he's quoting, but he said free markets were meant for people to build commodities, exchange it for money in order to buy other commodities, right? So you'd build up, in our case, let's say in your case, you build a program in order to get money in order to buy something else that you require, maybe food or some other commodity,
Okay.
clothes. But he's saying what capitalism is doing, it's changed. So in the early days, in a market, it would be commodity, money, and then commodity. What capitalism is doing, people make money to get more commodities in order to get more money. Money is the end goal, not the commodity.
Oh, not to buy something. It's just to.
Nah, it's just to accumulate wealth.
Oh.
Just accumulate wealth. So that's the greed that he's referring to, which is again an interesting idea if you think about it. But that's the issue he's thinking. Commodities or goals, the life, whatever it is, it's not the
So,
experiences or something we're trying to
so
achieve.
what
We're just trying to accumulate wealth.
is he trying to say that ideally you should just be spending your money all the time, type? So what?
Just I don't know. He hasn't said commented on that, but one thing I think he'd be suggesting is we shouldn't be thinking about money. We should be thinking about the things we just want. So his one of his biggest studies is on jobs, and he has this whole chapter or essay or book perhaps on bullshit jobs, and describes how our obsession with work. This is a big critique he gives of capitalism. Maybe another video will react to, where he talks about capitalism and socialism both rely on work so much. People have to keep working. You have to work is necessary, essential, and all that. I'm not going to say whether I agree with those views, but I won't get into that. I'll continue on this video on what else he commented. When you ask a question of what he's trying to say, is right now he's just trying to criticize capitalism, right?
Hmm.
So he's not giving his views are. He's just
Yeah,
saying
yeah.
why capitalism is bad. So all he's saying is that this thirst for money is bad because that takes away from other important things in life, or whatever makes us happy and makes society a better place. More more conscious of our fellow citizens, more considerate. Because one thing he was saying is they were greed and we become as we stop thinking about it, right? So when he talked about the CEO thing, I realized what he was trying to say is how we act against our own self-interest. Capitalism is a system which makes us cold and inconsiderate and unsocial or something of that sort. Not say I agree with him, but the evidence he's trying to put forth is that the CEOs don't want to disrupt the environment because of this competitive capitalism. They're still doing it, even though they don't want to do it. So they're trying to. Those contradictions come up in a system like this because it's indifferent to human emotions. That's his claim. Then
Then his
towards the ending, he
ending,
brings up,
yeah, the inequality and all
yeah,
that kind of makes sense.
uh,
Well,
yeah. Again, I'm just giving the Milton
yeah,
Friedman
yeah.
view is like
Mhm.
about what one claim he would make if I understand Milton properly is that one is you can't get equality. It's impossible
Yeah,
because we all have all kinds of disparities, right? Some people are born in the highly fertile lands of the Ganga, others are born in the deserts of the Sahara. So the guys in the Ganga are obviously going to have an advantage of food and all kinds of advantage. They're going to grow a better lifestyle, right? So we're all born with disparities. You're good. You're good with computers. I'm good at talking. I guess I don't know blabbering. So
no,
we have our advantage
and
and disadvantage,
understanding
right?
these things because clearly I don't understand and you
That's just
understand,
yeah,
so
that's only because that's a matter of quantity, not quality.
no, I don't
But
think so.
my point being, we're all given different talents, is what I was trying to establish, right? There's footballer, Messi can play, so there's always going to be disparity. So it's impossible to achieve
True.
equality like the communists would want. But Milton would probably go on further to say that capitalism is the best system to achieve as much as equality as possible. It's the optimal way to do it. David Graeber's argument is that's not the case because there are better ways to do it, is what he's trying to say. Um, the details I'm not sure. I haven't heard a lot of his work. I'm only getting into him early. That's why I thought it'll be a good reaction video. Another thing he brings up, which we talked about a few days ago, if you remember, I was talking about Richard Wolff, right? He's trying to rebrand socialism, and he's the socialist economist. The democracy amongst companies, remember?
Yeah, yeah,
That's something David Graeber mentioned. He mentioned in the video, if you paid attention to that
right.
or if you caught it, you might have lost in thought. But he mentions how those are fine. So he's thinking of a society where he wants cooperatives, right? If you remember, there's
Yeah.
the workers control the decisions, right? They democratically elect the head of the companies and all that. So he was talking about system, and he wouldn't call that capitalism, even though they compete in the marketplace. He's not calling it capitalism. Why specifically, he didn't have enough time to get into detail, I think. But so he even is dreaming of a system which Richard Wolff would call socialism, but I believe David Graeber wouldn't call it that, because socialism by definition requires state control. Um,
Oh,
One reason you wouldn't be getting it is because a lot of the worlds have definitions we don't have, and those definitions are also multiple definitions. Where different economists have different definitions. But to generalize saying, basically, capitalism, socialism requires most property and the means of production. Everything's revolving the means of production is controlled by the state in socialism. In a capitalist society, most means of production is controlled by private citizens. For example, all kinds of properties, factories, all that, 90% of them are a large percent, over 95% of them is controlled by private citizens in India, in America, and other democratic capitalist countries. In a socialist country, they would be controlled by the state. He doesn't want that either. There is a communist argument, a perspective of communism, the original sense, a Marx communism perhaps, where they're not controlled by the state, not private citizens, but they're controlled by the workers, the means of
right.
production. So a company is going, so that's what. So he's talking about a society where most of the means of productions are controlled by the workers, and yeah, they compete in a marketplace against other cooperatives, other companies, and all that. But it seems more human, and he's unwilling to call it capitalism for probably
No, but
technical
in
reasons
that
specifically.
case, there are no layers or what? There's no hierarchy or what or what? Because
There will be, but again, it's like a hierarchy where a government elects
right, that is the
the state
cooperatives only,
representative.
cooperates only. You're saying, yeah,
Sure,
yeah,
exactly. Cooperatives, yeah,
yeah,
yep, yeah, cooperatives, yeah. So yeah, he was talking. He mentioned that, and lastly, he talked about technology. I can't remember what exactly he said, but that's a key thing I also keep bringing.
No,
Again, these are things.
he said technology
Yeah.
initially like there's been a lot of innovation and all because of capitalism, and then
No,
it
he
might
said
be on
it's
decline
largely
after that.
because of state.
Yeah,
He said it's largely because of state. That is
no,
where I'm not sure.
yeah. Afterwards,
Yeah.
he said like it's then funded by state and government and everything, but then I don't know, I'm not sure about
I
that.
think what he said is initially he said it's all largely innovations brought by state, and then he says that neither state nor companies or private citizens can be credited, or capitalists can be credited for the innovation of technology, but something else. I don't know, academics or something like that. But again, these definitions are vague because if you ask Milton Friedman, he would say that, like, he brings up Einstein. He says these are private citizens, these are non-state actors. He would bring up Einstein and other kinds of innovators who weren't. It wasn't a result, a consequence of state intervention, but by their private initiatives. That these Galileo he would bring up, and he'd bring examples. I believe David Graeber would agree to those examples as well, but he would be unwilling to call them capitalists. So there is a significant difference in definitions, but that's why I like a lot of what he says, right? Like I told you, he's against state, he likes markets. So yeah, so to truly understand what they mean, you'd have to go back and see what their definitions are of the word.
Yeah,
And yeah,
yeah. As you were saying,
that's
like
where
for
it gets,
us,
yeah.
left, right,
Yeah.
socialist, capitalism, socialism is totally different than these intellectuals. That's what you were saying, right?
To a large extent, because they are about nuance and specific definitions, and we're talking about the intellectuals, contemporary intellectuals. You go back to 50 years, their definitions. There were several intellectuals then that each of them having their own definitions. Nuances. Largely there's a commonality between them, but they had few nuances which changed a lot of things.
Right.
The definitions we know or we use in common talk is what the general public understands, which I think is relevant too, because
Yeah,
again,
yeah,
we want to give the commoner's perspective, right? And
yeah,
we're a commoner ourselves, so
for sure.
it's largely, but I'm just starting to see as I explore these guys the common themes and all that. So, and that's the irony. So his idea of cooperatives is what he doesn't know. He won't call it socialism. In this very video, he says socialism is state control. But Richard Wolff, who's a socialist, self-declared socialist, calls it socialism. He says bringing democracies to the worker. He talks about market and individual citizen initiatives, like scientists perhaps. Milton Friedman would call that capitalism, a result of capitalism. He wouldn't call it. He would just call it whatever his thing is, anarchism, societal,
Right.
free markets, but he wouldn't call it. So there's a lot of intersection between these three economists. He's not an economist, but three economic ideas. idea people, but intellectuals, but they still wouldn't align with each other in terms of defining their ideology. So it's just interesting contrast. But
Yeah, for sure.
yeah, I guess we learned this was again largely educational than a reactive video.
Yeah, I don't know how
But
much I've, how
yeah,
much little, even little cleverer I became. I don't know, but sure.
no. But also, the thing is, it was too quick. So I
Yeah,
don't think
yeah,
anything he spoke was very. He was just trying to make multiple points superficially. So
yeah,
just trying to get good criticism. But to summarize, it would be he doesn't believe it's government or capitalists that created technology or helped innovate that. It's some other entity which he didn't have enough time to elaborate.
right,
He thinks capitalism is soulless, the common criticism, that is greed and it's nothing else. It doesn't account for the emotional aspects and the social betterment. Those were two main criticisms, and probably amongst other things. It doesn't truly reflect what the market wants. He says it's not a free market. He says capitalism, and so yeah, makes you act against your own interest. So yeah, not saying I entirely agree with, but I'm not in a position to refute David Graeber, that's for sure. So I will be careful in what I say. All I know is I know at least there are intellectuals of the past that would disagree with him. That much I can say. But yeah, how much truth? He's talking about the current. He's saying he also said that capitalism's time has come. It's no longer serving its purpose, so it's done with again. So maybe his arguments might be relevant today, and it wasn't relevant to the people of the past. But hard to say. Yeah, it hasn't changed my mind enough. But there's a lot to read. Like I said, I intend to read his book that which has a lot to do with money. So
that and
we'll have to
bullshit
see where
jobs
you
or
are.
something else. Some books.
Bullshit jobs. I don't know if that's a book, but that's his main. His main study. I'm sure he has a book on it, but I don't know what the job book's
Oh,
name is.
right,
That is by far his most famous book, I'm sure.
right, right.
Yeah, because he's against clearing debt. There's interesting ideas, and then we could talk about it. But yeah, another video.
Yeah.
He has an idea. Student. He makes a good case for clearing student debt and all that. And
Who? This
yeah,
guy only.
it's he.
Okay, okay, okay.
Yeah, David Graeber. Yeah.
Right.
And yeah, the whole thing on bullshit jobs, where jobs are meaningless jobs. That is a consequence of capitalism, he would say. But yeah, interesting
Yeah,
ideas.
yeah. That
Like
was.
Nassim Taleb said, original thinker. Mm.
Yeah, maybe we should do some Nasib Talib reactions as well. Maybe.
That guy, the problem with him is he is illegible when he talks. If you couldn't keep up with this guy, you won't keep up
Right.
with him. He's not even very I mean, I wouldn't want to say coherent, but what's the word I'm looking for? It's not legible. What you
I
can't.
think
It's
even
he murmurs. It's very murmury.
right. Even
To
Friedman
some extent,
is.
even him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
even Friedman is. I think Friedman uses like bigger words or something. I think, right?
It's not just that. Friedman, by far, if there's one thing he's clearly better than all the intellectuals I've seen, is his ability to explain an idea.
Okay.
He focuses on persuasion.
Oh
There's no
no,
one who
I'm.
could
I
talk
think
like
I'm talking
Friedman.
about someone
Yeah.
else. I think I'm talking about
You're
someone
talking
else.
to someone else,
Yeah, yeah,
perhaps. This is the pencil guy, the guy
yeah,
who
yeah.
talked
Correct,
about the
correct,
pencil
correct,
example.
correct, correct.
Oh, this guy is all about analogies, examples, and explanation. No one can beat him. Friedman is the best teacher. If he was a socialist, socialism would be mainstream. Let's put it that way. That's the compliment I'd give him. He's just so good at explaining things. So you can't beat him as a teacher and or as a person explaining it. So far, I haven't experienced him, whether it's Taleb or David Graeber or anyone. They might be better in writing in books, but in speaking and explaining and persuasion, that was his mantra, his dictum, his his axiom. Friedman. It's all about persuasion. Like if, like for example, if a reporter would ask him a question like, if you were a dictator for one day and you could form the rules of society, what would it be? His response to that, I am no dictator. I'd never want to be a dictator. My only key thing is to do it through persuasion. That's the only way. If I'm unable to persuade, then my ideas are meaningless.
Right.
Only through persuasion do I. That's so was a key dictum of it. So as a result, I think that contributed to
Yeah, yeah.
his persuasive ways of teaching and this, because it was so essential that anything that would seem contrary or something, seem confrontational, he would naturally swivel through it. And so it just seems so persuasive, his arguments, and
Right.
a lot. And combined with his expertise on economics and statistics and logic, general logical thinking. So it's a deadly combination. I'm not surprised America went in that direction given intellectuals like him. Whether he's irrespective of whether he's right or wrong, I'm just saying these abilities are these are what the greatest leaders are made out of in the world, whether it's politicians, or army men, or sportsmen, whatever it is.
Right,
Yeah,
right. Nice, very nice. I mean,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, we'll probably come up with more of these such videos and
Yeah, for sure,
reactions.
for sure. As we learn more, as we so much, we're basic, boring computer science engineers trying to delve into another world. So yeah,
Yeah,
just
yeah,
trying to follow where the river takes us. Definitely, we are interested. Clearly, if you haven't realized by now, audience, that
yeah,
the topics of great interest to
yeah,
us.
yeah.
Yeah,
Hopefully, we'll make it more frequent as well. So,
for sure.
so yeah, I think,
Yeah,
do you want to end this video then?
yeah. Let's go for it. Yeah,
All
next
right, all
time,
right.
man.
See you. Bye bye.